whole thing when Elise and I started this was don't go this alone. There's no reason to do any of this alone. Leverage each other, use each other's resources, stop recreating the wheel. A lot of this stuff has been done before. So instead, put your minds together, put your brains together and work with people and figure out how everybody can leverage their experience to make your experience with whatever you're doing even better.
Welcome to Heroes of the Creative Revolution. Today's guest is Meredith Black, a seasoned DesignOps powerhouse, known for working with companies worldwide such as the New York Times and Pinterest, as well as founding the DesignOps Assembly. Today, she'll be talking about the importance and evolution of DesignOps, strategies for careers in the DesignOps space, and how community is her biggest inspiration. And now, Meredith Black. Let's dive in.
Hi, Meredith. Lovely to have you on the show today. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We'd love to just start simple and, learn more about you and your background, how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Black. I reside in Monterey, California, so a couple hours south of San Francisco. I run a community called DesignOps Assembly, and I consult on design operations for a bunch of companies around the world. A little bit about how I got into this, which is interesting. DesignOps actually wasn't a thing 10 years ago, and I was actually working at a design firm called HOTCR that was acquired by Facebook, which is now Meta. And during that acquisition, they acquired what was called the producer team and kind of the account management team. I was responsible for kind of helping integrate 75 designers into Facebook, into their ads org, when they only had three designers at the time. And so I'd worked really closely with the leadership team over there to, help all of these people get acclimated into going from a design firm into it was post-startup, right? So it was after Facebook's IPO. And they'd never really worked in the a lot of these folks had never worked in a Silicon Valley tech company. So worked on that for a little while. And then Bob Baxley, who was running design at Pinterest at the time, had a need for somebody to kind of be his right-hand human being. He really wanted to focus on all things design, all things quality of design, and help growing, the quality of the work with the designers and help really growing the designers. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to join him at Pinterest, where I did just that. And I helped him with kind of everything in the kitchen sink. And this name DesignOps was kind of buzzing around. There were only a few people in the industry that had it, and started technically doing DesignOps. And then I've just been helping to define it ever since, and, helping evangelize the role with all of the folks who also kind of started out doing this as well.
How would you characterize the current state of DesignOps now, and how does that compare to what you saw back then, and how has it evolved?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I don't think there's going to be one straightforward answer. So I'll kind of give a prong approach to how I see this now. So back then, DesignOps was still being defined. DesignOps was, like I said, everything in the kitchen sink, doing whatever you needed to take to get as much off the design leader's plate as possible. I still think that stands today. I think what has kind of evolved is that it's not just one person doing a design ops role in a lot of these organizations. I would say the majority of people in design ops are a team of one, but there are a lot of organizations that now have teams of, 10, 20, 50, 200, right? And so there's definitely been a rise of design operations and what that means. And I think it really means different things in different companies. So there are the folks who are doing everything in the kitchen sink. There are also the folks who are really focusing on specific programs and programming within those design teams that those design organizations deem really necessary. And so that could be being a program manager on design systems, right? And making sure that design systems is evangelized and articulated, and people in the design team know what design systems is, how to apply design systems, and how to kind of move faster. Then, there could be different programs, like some folks working on learning and development, or some folks working on, culture. So there's a lot of different aspects of that. I think there's kind of been this wave where it started out kind of everything in the kitchen sink. Then it started getting really more defined with anybody who was having more than 2 or 3 or 4 people in a design ops team within a company. You could really start kind of honing in what those needs were and where to pair those people based off of, whether it was, needs of the business, needs of the design team, and needs of the design leader. Then I think, right before the pandemic hit, or actually during the pandemic, I'd say that's where kind of design ops kind of became this like wildly popular role. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that it was easier for people to be in the office and know what people were doing. The pandemic hit, that was not such the case. Everyone started working from home and things started becoming more difficult to track. And when you are tracking them, where are you tracking them, right? Is it design files? Is it through different tools? Is it through different tracking systems? Is it on Slack? Is it on email? Like all of this stuff just kind of became, oh my God, where do I put the information? And so I think design ops really became important there to just help people literally function and get people like guided to the right places, making sure they're telling people the right information, where it's going, just to get projects moving and going along. And so design ops people, I think, came in and started focusing really hard and heavy on what does the culture look like? How are we growing our team members? How are we getting the best work out there and getting our designers recognized when they can't be in front of people anymore and they're just behind a Zoom screen? Fast forward to now, I think this is honestly a very wildly changing landscape. And I can't say that what happened 3 months ago is the same that's what's happening now. But what I am seeing is that a lot of organizations are leveraging design ops and are really honing in on what the business needs and if that design ops person can map to certain metrics or certain company goals. And so while design ops has always been this role that's kind of been behind the scenes, kind of working on things, making sure the train is running, now a lot of these organizations are asking for these design ops people to be measured in a way that they've never really been measured before or haven't been measured to the same accuracy. And so I think there's been this evolution and everything's going to change, especially in Silicon Valley, especially in the landscape. You never know what your job's going to be 6 months ago is going to be the same in future 6 months. And so I think for anybody who's in this role, they're seeing it and they're feeling it and they're adapting really quickly. I think for those people who want to get into this role, I think it's just going to be a bit of a bumpy road for a little while. Design leaders are going to want different things. Companies are going to want different styles of folks and people who are going to run design ops. And it's not going to be as consistent as it potentially once was.
I'm curious, in those situations where there is sort of a design ops leader, what steps do you see them taking next in their career? What comes next once you kind of reach the top level of design ops within your company?
One of the really cool things about running DesignOps Assembly and running this community is I get to meet a ton of people who are in this role, leadership all the way down to people just starting out. And so I get to see where people are at and what people are doing. And so I think there's a couple different routes. One is that if you are at the top of your game and you're at the top and there's nowhere to go, well, the first question is what do you enjoy doing, right? There's some design leaders who have run these large design ops teams who've actually thoroughly enjoyed going back and doing the work and literally being like a principal or a staff kind of design program manager, just doing the work, not having to people manage, not having to manage like relationships to such an extent, not having to manage like finance, L&D, like all this stuff, just like truly doing like design operational work and honing really into it. I've seen a lot of folks go that way, which I think is really cool. The other thing is that you've got leaders like Kristen Skinner, right, who wrote the book Org Design for Design Orgs with Peter Merholtz. She's a fantastic example of somebody who has been in design operations and then has gone on to lead large design teams and becoming a design leader. So I think that's also another opportunity. And of course, it depends on you. It depends on the type of company that you would be doing this with. There are organizations that are like, this person knows like everything operationally. We've got really great people at a certain level who know everything, who know how to like build a solid design team and know what great design work is. That person, the person who's good at the operations and the relationships and all that, maybe they should be running the team. So there are options like that. Not many, but they're out there. And I think the last one is going and using this and kind of expanding your horizon. So some people strive to be a COO, right? They leave this role and they're like, okay, I've done operations at a large organization that's maybe bigger than some companies. Maybe that's an opportunity to maybe go into a smaller company and operate the whole company, not just the design team. I think there are more opportunities out there now than there have been before. I think in the early days, it was really hard. And you're like, okay, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go next? Like, is there a next? But I think just because this role has been deemed so useful and people are getting their eyes on it and are much more aware of what somebody in this role could do, other people are much more willing to kind of explore what that could mean for like having that person have bigger impact and have, you know, a much more larger footprint in some of these companies and within the industry as a whole.
What are your thoughts on how people in ops today can kind of best position themselves and or what they can do to make their current positions more resilient to future external factors, whatever they may be?
I think we need to look at the bigger landscape, though, when we're talking about this. I think when you're looking at the history of layoffs and the economy, like it's not just you being in design ops, it's you being an impact of like 10 other things. It's like a tidal wave of things that are coming in, right? What does the economy look like? What does the health of the business look like? You know, what does the health of the team look like? And so what's really important to remember is that in times of economic uncertainty, there's always going to be layoffs. And unfortunately, the folks that are laid off are usually in a support or an adjacent to like a critical role. And that's just the reality of it. It's not just people who are in design ops. We're talking about researchers, we're talking about writers, we're talking about people in HR, we're talking about recruiters. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? Like I always say, like, if you're not the one like designing in Figma or like punching zeros and ones into a computer, your job is unfortunately not deemed absolutely necessary because they need to keep the people in the roles who are going to keep the company afloat. And I think all of us are like, well, no, like we're the ones that help run these organizations. Like, of course we're important. But honestly, people just think about the bottom line, and that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the case. If you look at the advertising agency model, which I think is a good one for a lot of the folks who have been in like the creative industry before, when that ad agency lands that client, you know, they're like, oh gosh, we need to hire up all of these people because all these people need to do this work for this client. Like, this is how it runs. So you go out, you get the best people, you hire them in, they do great work. And then all of a sudden the client, after maybe a year, 2 years, 5, 10 or whatever, is like, we want to go with a different agency. Well, what unfortunately happens is when that client goes to a different agency, that the current ad agency that you are in doesn't have the funds to pay you. That has nothing to do with you. It is not a personal decision. It's literally, we can't keep you on or we can't keep the lights on. And so unless they can find another client that's going to be able to help keep your job so that way you are still on a different project, great. But when that doesn't happen, as a result, the client goes, and sometimes a lot of that team goes with it. And so how do you kind of like become resilient out of that, I think is one thing. And realizing that, one, it's not personal. Two, there will be another job for you at some given point. It might not be tomorrow, but it will come. Three is that sometimes some of these decisions that aren't made for you, and while they are absolutely horrible in the duration of when they are happening, turn out to be some of the best things that could ever happen to you if you look forward and you're able to look back and you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I wasn't happy there, or maybe I wasn't getting compensated properly, or, you know, maybe I just didn't have the same opportunities that I have now. I've personally gone through that, and I look back, and as horrible as those situations are, I think there's always a silver lining. Like, there's always a silver lining. And I think, I don't want to say it takes practice of losing your job because that's awful, but there's ways that you can kind of prepare yourself for it. And there's also like a large community of people who are going through the same thing, and like look to them to support you. Work on your connections, work on finding out what different roles are out there and what your skill sets are applicable for today. If you're in an organization and you're trying to like show the value of your job, I think the first thing you do is you work on the highest impact projects that are within your company and within your organization. So if your company's like, we have these top 3 priorities for the year, make sure that you are on one of those top 3 priorities. Make yourself indisposable and focusing on what the company needs and what the company is striving to get.
I think that's well said, and a really important perspective, as you say, like sometimes these are just outside of your control. And then, as you say, making yourself indispensable by working on aligning your work with those priorities is like super key.
A personal example is that when I was at IDEO, I had been there for 2 years. I honestly thought I was never going to leave IDEO, ever. I thought, like, this is my place. These are my people. This company is amazing. I am never leaving this company. Well, guess what? 2009 hit, and along with pretty much 80% of my peers, I got let go. And anybody who wasn't in a super critical role to the business was let go. And that was so incredibly hard to swallow. I mean, I was absolutely devastated. I'm never going to find people like this to work with again. I'm never going to be stimulated the way that I was on the projects that I was working on. You know, it took me a few consulting jobs in between that I wasn't really thrilled about, but it paid the bills. You take the jobs, you get the jobs, you work your butt off. And sure enough, then the opportunities came where I worked at an ad agency where I ended up meeting my husband, right? Then I worked at a design firm that ended up being acquired by Facebook. And then that led me to Pinterest, you know, and that has led me to running a design community and getting to meet all these people now. And so I think something that was truly crummy, I can look back on now and be like, wow, gosh, like if I would have stayed there, I would have never had these opportunities. I would have never met this many like people, these amazing designers. My world would have been so narrow, you know? And so anytime that I am coming up with a hard situation or, you know, I'm having to do something that maybe I'm not such a fan of, or, you know, there's just a strenuous part in my life, I always kind of look back to that period and I'm like, you know what? I did it once and I survived. I can do it again and I will survive.
Let's talk AI. So what are the best applications of AI that you're seeing today within DesignOps? And how do you think it will really impact the practice the most, let's say, over the next year or two?
I think what's interesting with AI is we just came out with the DesignOps benchmarking report in 2023. And one of the things that was like really stuck out with us is that like over half of the people who took the survey are using AI in some way, shape, or form, which I think is really interesting. I think when this whole like AI conversation came about and like really became pronounced is that a lot of people were like, oh God, AI is going to take over my job. I think a lot of people had a right to be anxious about that because AI could take over everybody's jobs. However, I think AI has actually been used to DesignOps benefit and has actually taken a lot of like the administrative work off of people who are using it and actually allowing DesignOps people to focus on the people and the practice and the organizations that they're working with. It could be as simple as like having an AI note taker, right? So when you and I are on a call together, Thomas, we are not sitting there furiously taking notes, figuring out what next steps are. We could genuinely have a conversation. We could figure out like what we need to accomplish, and then something else, AI, can help bring that back, and we can look through the notes and we can be like, okay, like this is great. We said the word enlightenment 20 times or whatever. Like, what does that mean? Where does that stream towards what we need to do on the next project? Two is that I think you can start using it for like applications such as resourcing is a big one. I think like drafting emails, drafting communications plans, creating communication plans is a big one that I see. Helping with presentations and decks and stuff that like normally takes a ton of time, like leverage AI and to make sure that you're using it as a tool. I'd say just like be super open-minded and curious to it and see how it can help you, not hinder you.
How do you effectively measure and communicate the value of DesignOps to external stakeholders or people on other teams?
I think there's a couple ways that you can do that. I think if you are just starting out in an ops role at an organization, I think you can go in and you can do kind of like the roadshow of what's working and what's not, right? And I'm like a huge proponent of the roadshow, like meeting with people externally from the design team, meeting people in the design team and be like, what's working, what's not? And then like really coming up with like an assessment of like what you should be doing in the next 90 days, 6 months, a year, right? And so you've created this own like roadmap for yourself, and then you start mapping to it. If one of the things is like, we need to do a better job of doing crits because we just can't get to a place where we can actually get our designs passed off to engineering in an amount of time because there's like so much feedback always happening on the table. Let's focus on that problem. Let's see how we can like optimize things. Let's see if we can get clearer in terms of like what the designers need to do their best work and get that shipped out the door. So you have a before, which was it takes us maybe 6 months to get something out the door. Give this a try for the next 3 months or 6 months. How fast are you getting things out the door, right? Like, are you like getting things out faster by a week, 2 weeks, a month? Like, what is it? Granted, not everything's going to be like waterfall, right? When the next poll scores or the, company survey comes out, how did things move the needle on the same questions, right? Like, did people feel more confident that like they had more opportunities for growth? Did people feel like they had more clarity in terms of like where the company was moving? And so like measuring in the same thing and be like, sweet, like 40% of the people thought we're doing a better job than we were last time. What were the implications of that? What did you do to make that needle move?
You mentioned this in your intro, in your background, DesignOps Assembly. You're one of the wonderful people that brought us this wonderful community. I'd love to kind of understand, what was your initial motivation for starting the community?
I think part of it was when I was at Pinterest, I didn't really know anybody who had this role, right? Like I didn't know a single soul. I knew people in the agency world, the design agency, the ad agency world. I did not know anybody in Silicon Valley working at a tech company who was like having the same problems that I was. And so I actually found this woman, Elise Echelle, who was on LinkedIn, and I messaged her. I was like, hey, it looks like you have a design ops role. So do I. And so we started talking, and then she was in New York. She worked at Spotify. She came out to San Francisco, and we were like, okay, like this is pretty cool. Like, I feel like we're leveraging each other in a way that I can't talk to anybody else about. And so we were like, let's just keep talking. And then sure enough, a couple more people popped up on LinkedIn with like the same role. Because you could tell like all the design leaders were talking about this role with each other. Right? So we started this community, and it was honestly at the time just in person. Once a quarter, we'd get together and it would just slowly grow, right? Right before COVID hit, we actually had, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 people coming to our events. And we'd set it up and we'd have like speakers, and companies would be like, hey, you can use our conference room and we'll give you some, wine and soda if you want. And so it became this really cool way and a really low lift way to like build this community and get people involved. Then the design leaders would come and, they'd be like, oh, well, this is what's happening. We want this. So it was really cool what was happening. And fast forward to today, we have over 6,000 people on the Slack channel. We have 23 global chapters around the world with volunteers running each of those chapters. We have monthly chit chats where people can get together as a community and just talk and meet other people within the community. The whole thing when Elise and I started this was, don't go this alone. There's no reason to do any of this alone. Leverage each other, use each other's resources, stop recreating the wheel. A lot of this stuff has been done before. So instead, put your minds together, put your brains together and work with people and figure out how everybody can leverage their experience to make your experience with whatever you're doing even better.
I'm interested to know, it actually doesn't have to be within DesignOps. It can actually be from anywhere. Where and who gives you your inspiration? Who are some figures that you admire within the community and in general?
I admire the folks within our community that have really worked with me over the last decade and have been not only like a partner in figuring out how to build this community and make it better, but deeply have an appreciation and a passion for making this practice sustainable and advocating for it and kind of going to great lengths to make sure that this is well known across not only their organizations, but other organizations. So I think that's like really important. And a lot of these communities just take and they don't give. And I think that's the one thing that I'm really, really, really proud of is that this community gives a lot more than they take. That's irreplaceable. It's just knowing that you have this resource of people that are always going to be there. I mean, some of my closest friends I have literally met off of this channel, right? And you can't say that for a lot of places. And especially in this remote world right now, it's hard to make connections. And honestly, as you get older, it's just hard to make friends. And it's like the one place where I'm like, gosh, like people are just so passionate about what they do. And they're also really good human beings. So I think that's one. I think in the industry, there's There are some people that I really admire. I think Tom Bodkin, who's the chief design officer at the New York Times, is one of those folks. He has been in the industry forever. He is not like a public speaker or like somebody who gets out there that much, but like the impact that he has had on the world of journalism and what journalism looks like and how people experience journalism in terms of like an actual product is pretty phenomenal. I think people who are deeply appreciative of the design world and the design practice and aren't doing this just to have a name, but are doing this to build a better design culture and practice and advocacy within these design orgs is pretty phenomenal.
If you were to distill some advice for someone who's just starting design operations today, let's say even at an entry-level role, what would that be?
So one, be curious. Talk to as many people as you can about what design operations is and what design operations means at different companies. Two is I think you need to be incredibly humble. The reason why I say that is there's a lot of folks within the design ops community or people who want to be in design ops that don't necessarily have that skill set yet. And I think that design ops can be misconstrued solely as like a project management job. And that's only like the tiniest sliver of what you do in design operations. Design operations is actually kind of like a mid-level kind of career role. And what I mean by that is just because you have 10 years of project management experience at a design firm and ad agency doesn't mean you're going to get a mid-level role or become the director of design ops at a company, at a tech company or some of these companies that have this. The reason why is that it's not just project management. It's a lot of relationship management. It's a lot about understanding HR. It's a lot about understanding roadmaps and OKRs. It's a lot of understanding about how products work and are implemented and how they, like understanding the technical, capabilities of how some of these products are impacted and, what happens during engineering and Q&A and getting the stuff out the door. And so it's not just simply managing a project. It is managing larger organizations of teams and people, but also like products at a much larger level. And so while you could be project managing something very tiny, that's just in the scheme of things, that's something that's just a very small sliver. And so I think if you're getting into this and you have, been in some of those roles before, it's like, where can you start out within some of these organizations? And then how can you move into some of these other roles? Just taking different opportunities, taking classes, meeting with other people, doing your research, doing, knowledge, volunteering, I think is a big part too, right? And I'm not just saying that because I run a design community. I'm saying that because if you don't know something and you really are curious about a skill set or maybe you want to practice it, have something on your resume, go volunteer, right? And volunteer and get that on your resume. So that way, when you are applying for some of these jobs, they're like, oh, well, maybe they haven't done it in a full capacity, but they've done it for X amount of months in this other capacity. And I can see that as a transferable skill set. So things like that, I think, are really important. I do also think that for what it's worth, there's such an inundation of people applying for design ops jobs. And so what is going to make you stand out and what is going to make you different kind of than the rest? And so like really highlighting that and showing people what your skill set is and being able to articulate it, I think is pretty important.
So that was my last question. I just want to give you the floor. Is there anything else that you want to say or plug?
I will always plug DesignOps Assembly. If you are not a member and you want to be a member, go to designopsassembly.com and click on the button that asks to join our Slack channel. We would love to have you in there. We'd love to further the conversation with anybody who's interested in design ops, to people who are in design ops, to design leaders and cross-functional partners who really want to learn more. So I think that's really important.
Thank you very much, Meredith. It's an honor to have you on the show, and I always enjoy our conversations.
Thanks for joining us on Heroes of the Creative Revolution. Stay tuned for more episodes from inspiring leaders, and don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get podcasts.